I mean, even if you look at the fact that they are absolutely intolerant towards seeing the image of Christ, who was without question and undisputably a black man, they can't even tolerate seeing Christ in any other image but their own, despite the overwhelming evidence. But when I look at this move to eliminate the teaching of slavery and racism from American history classes and civics classes, I look at this as them preparing for the fact that they one day soon expect to have very little black people left in this country. Therefore, it's no need to even cover these topics. I mean, they're really setting up the society in such a way that it caters to black people no longer being around. And what was I just about to say? Oh, yes, the day after the Arlington event for the Howard University homecoming kickoff, there's going to be an almost eclipse. The moon is just going to miss the Earth's shadow, but it's still pretty significant. And I think that's also a full moon that day. But the reason I'm mentioning that is on August the 17th, that is the anniversary of when the first man died for John Brown during the Harper's Ferry raid in Virginia, 1859. He was an enslaved, escaped African by the name of Dangerfield Newby. He escaped from slavery because he wanted to fight to help free his wife and children. And he joined John Brown. And on October the 17th, he was the first martyr in the cause of abolition. He was shot through the neck with a railroad spike, because the white folks in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, they didn't really have any bullets. So they put railroad spikes in their and they shot him through the neck, and he died instantly. And then they his body. And some Caucasians who witnessed of Dangerfield Newby's corpse said that it was one of the worst and most inhumane things they ever seen in his life. They took bones, they took parts of his ears, his tongue. I mean, they completely his body and then just threw it in a ditch. And I think they left his body out there under the sun, you know, for days before they even threw it in a ditch. You know, and they did that to all our ancestors. They did it to Nat Turner. But I'm bringing this up because I'm thinking about going to Harper's Ferry on the day of the almost eclipse in honor of Dangerfield Newby and the other 4 blacks, you know, who struggled with John Brown. Because you always hear about John Brown, but nobody talks about the 5 black men who were there. Dangerfield Newby was the first one to die. Shields Green also died. He could have escaped, but he went back down to support John Brown, and he refused to leave John Brown, and that's how he was captured and ultimately. But he could have got away and chose not to. He was living with Frederick Douglass, and it was him and Frederick Douglass who went to meet with John Brown before the raid, when Frederick Douglass told John Brown, this isn't going to work, this is madness, and you need to call it off. But Shields Green decided to go anyway. He had escaped from Charleston, South Carolina himself. And then there was another brother by the name of John Anthony Copeland. He was caught, I think, on a boat trying to get away. And then there was another brother named James Sheridan, Lewis Sheridan Leary, and he was, so 2 of them were after the fact, 2 were on the day of, okay, and only 1 black man escaped. His name was Osborne Anderson. He was from Chester, Pennsylvania. And after the John Brown raid, he ended up being a correspondent for the first newspaper ever published by a black woman in North America. Her name was Mary Ann Shadd. She was from Wilmington, Delaware, but she ended up in Canada where she published the first newspaper. She worked with Martin Delaney and others. And so Osborne Anderson worked with her for a while before he ultimately died. And he wrote a narrative. It's called Voice from Harper's Ferry. You can probably get it for free on download on the internet. Everybody should read it. Voice from Harper's Ferry. It's the only narrative of what happened during the John Brown raid from a black man.
Wow. So now, you know, you talked about how they use railroad spikes or nails because they didn't have no bullets. But what is it that makes human beings act so inhumane? The same as they did with the act of slavery. What is it that, I understand, you know, this world we live in is both good and evil. And but what is the psychology that would make people act so inhumane?
You know what? I believe it's cultural. I also think it's psychogenetic. And what I mean by that, I believe the calcified pineal gland of the Caucasian has affected their ability to experience genuine compassion and remorse, especially for the things that they do for people who are not members of their in group. Because we have seen this pattern of sociopathic behavior from them for thousands of years now. You know, this has been going on for millennia. And in particularly in America, when we look at how savagely they have of African people, especially our heroes. What they did to Dangerfield Newby, they did it to Nat Turner. What they did to Nat Turner, they did to almost every black man who they had in this country. And I'm sure there's white folks now in America who still have heirlooms and souvenirs from some of those. You know, what would make you do something like this? It's because you have the inability to completely experience remorse for members who are outside of their in group. And the last piece on that is I do believe that the climatic trauma that they experienced during the ice ages in Europe played a big role in this, because they were basically by Mother Nature for whatever reason. The Caucasian was by Mother the sun as we did. In fact, we are the only sun and earth people. They are the ice people. You have the sand people. You have the mountain people who are the descendants of the Mongoloids. All three of them are related. All three of them come from Asia. And all three of them have a history of psychopathological behavior. They've their daughters, they've committed genocide. They've done things that black people just don't do, because we are the sun and earth people. And so I believe, you know, that until someone finds some sort of solution to decalcify the pineal gland of the Caucasian, we might always have to deal with this type of ruthless behavior.
So I would go so far as to say that maybe they became angry at God because they would say, well, why would God make them suffer like this? And so if they have no love of God, then they would have no love of any other human beings.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you look at the fact that they are absolutely intolerant towards seeing the image of Christ, who was without question and undisputably a black man, they can't even tolerate seeing Christ in any other image but their own, despite the overwhelming evidence, including Russian President Putin's display, you know, of the Black Madonna and Child that they had in the Russian cathedral. You know, they refused to show Christ as anything other than the Caucasian. They refused to show Abraham as anything other than the Caucasian. Why is that a problem for you when you know that he didn't look like you? It's because you have a God complex, and that God complex is so strong that you cannot stomach the possibility that God was not in your hue.
All right. Well, listen, we got to take a break. When we come back after this break, we're going to continue the conversation with Dr. Umar Johnson. Calling it ill because I say hatred is a disease. And so I'm asking you, Dr. Johnson, as a psychologist, is there any cure for them and the disease that they inherently have adopted?
In psychology, there's a group of disabilities, disorders, diagnoses known as personality disorders. Personality disorders are distinguished from other mental conditions because they are egocentric. Egocentricity speaks to when a person has a problem that they benefit from, that they see as a positive problem, and therefore have no need to rid themselves of. For example, narcissists. Narcissistic personality disorder. That is the perfect example. These are people who have a grandiose assessment of themselves, who believe all others are beneath them, who believe they can't do nothing wrong and should constantly be praised at all times. That is a disorder that affects the people in their lives, but it doesn't affect them because they are proud to be it. And so the problem with personality disorders, like, you know, sociopathic personality disorder, which I believe, you know, many within the European race suffer from, they see it as a benefit. Because think about it. That's how they took over the world. That's how they maintain control of the world. That's how they dominate Africa's resources. That's how they keep black people in their place. So you have to ask yourself, why would they see this ruthless attitude as a illness when it has been responsible for how they've come to control the planet?
That is true. That is so true. In fact, I often say that they are doing what they're supposed to do in order to maintain power. It is we that don't do what we are supposed to do in order to gain power within ourselves.
Yeah, I think it is the same. It's the same system that the world powers use to actually gain, to intimidate other people. It cuts across colors, in particular when it comes to control over the world. Mm-hmm. It's like with the smallest country with the most powerful, intimidate, most of the highly populated nations, and then because they have to intimidate them psychologically, to make sure that they control them and put fears in them in order to control their resources and control their mind.
And let us also be clear that mm-hmm. we're not just talking about European psychopathology from the past. This is not historical. This is present-based. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at what Bill Gates is doing.
Yes.
Bill Gates and the global agricultural elite are trying to bully the African Union into forcing all member states to stop their farmers from using traditional seed and crop to create food. Mm-hmm. Bill Gates wants all farmers in Africa and throughout the world to purchase all of their seed from Monsanto and all these other agribusinesses that use genetically modified crop that has been proven to be carcinogenic and dangerous to the soil. It only grows once and it has to be replaced every year. And they're trying to get Africa to force its farmers to buy from them. Now, these are people who come from a family lineage where they've been farming for 20,000 years. And now you have Caucasians coming in saying, we don't want them using their traditional means of farming, and we want them to get all their seed and crop from us as a means of doing what? African people causing disease and reducing our population. Bill Gates and others said the world would be better served if it had a population of about 3 to 15 million people. Yeah. Now, as you know, there's almost, 7-8 billion people in the world. He said 3 to 15 million. Do you know how many people have to in order for them to realize their dream? COVID is a part of that. The LGBT crusade against our children is a part of that. The black on black crime, the police genocide, all of these strategies are agenda items being used to bring about the significant and serious reduction of African life in this world.
Yeah.
Well, we had a conversation just last week on the show with Phil Washington and Brother Black, and we touched on that about the convenience of fast food and junk food as opposed to eating. And so I was saying that one of the things that some people are saying is that there's a food shortage. And so in order to feed all the people that we have here, they had to invent artificial food because they didn't have enough real food to feed everybody. So that is one of the reasons for population control, because they don't have enough food to feed everybody. And then they also think that if you invent artificial food, then people could think that they're eating, even though they're not eating healthy.
Yeah. And Bill Gates is weaponizing his wealth. He doesn't have the, but he's weaponizing his wealth to control people to think that because he's rich, whatever he says, especially Africans who sometimes do not have their own minds. I'm sorry to say that, because Africans just follow things blindly. So he's weaponizing his wealth to control what he wants to control, to gain that kind of power over Africans.
So what do you think about the food shortage, Doctor?
Well, I don't think there's an African community on earth that has food security. You may have a couple individual families that have food security, but I'm not aware of any nation in the world, any black country anywhere in the world that has food security. And one of the reasons they don't have food security is one of the things that the World Bank and the IMF does out of DC, the same thing that Britain and France and Belgium do, is when you take this loan money, and this is why, there has to be something done about the amount of, what do they call it, investment in aid that Africa receives, because that's the most misleading word ever used. Mm-hmm. It's not investment and it's not aid. I call it financial sabotage. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. Because what they do is they give you a bunch of money And guess what? They basically erode the economic system of your country. So the money they gave you, you can't even benefit from it. You know, they make you open up your economy for all these European countries, companies to come in there and compete with your indigenous markets and your indigenous businesses. And because the Europeans can produce and refine and sell cheaper the things that they sell, how can an African business, an African market compete with a white company coming in, you know, selling the same thing? Sooner or later, they're going to outsell you because they can sell it cheaper, and they're going to bankrupt your market. And that's why you got so many African countries importing food that they used to grow 75 years. Why are you importing fish when you used to fish? Why are you importing tea when you can grow your own tea? Why are you importing chickens when you used to have your own poultry farm? It's because they came in and they sabotaged those markets by telling Africa, you have to participate in a free economy. You cannot exclude European companies from coming into Africa and selling against your own companies. Of course, that's a recipe for disaster. But because so many of our African heads of state are so lazy and they're also so greedy that they will take any free money, no matter what the costs are to the people.
Wow. That is true. That is true. I agree with you 100%. It's happening in my country, Ghana, and most African countries like Nigeria, and it is so pathetic.
So I think we have Yusef on the phone line, wants to join the conversation. Good afternoon, Yusef. How you doing today?
Yes, good afternoon.
Okay, I could barely hear you, though.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you.
You were speaking earlier on about the the melanated people being the people of the sun.
Yes.
Yes. We thrive off the sun. We're like squirrel and the raccoon. The raccoon comes out at night and forages for food. The squirrel comes out during the daytime. The melanated people live by the daytime, and the non-melanated people live by the night. It's called being nocturnal. It's their nature to be nocturnal. I worked for a person involuntarily, was a Caucasian male, and he would drink coffee all day long to stay up. And I found out later that when he would go home, he would stop at a bar and drink some hard liquor so he could go to sleep at night. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people who are nocturnal. Their nature is to come out at night when the moon comes, especially when the moon is full, and to go in the daytime, do like Dracula, go hide in a cave somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusef. So now, another thing, Dr. Johnson, but I heard a caller who was a regular WURD radio caller, and I heard him on the Al Sharpton show last week, and they were talking about young people. He didn't start out with young African American people. He said young people like the Chinese people and Asian young people. They don't want to hear that stuff about their history. And I'm finding it more and more that a lot of African-American young people, they don't want to hear nothing about our history and our heroes and our legacy. And they are stuck with keeping up with the latest trend instead of finding out what's in their background. Do you find that to be true? And if so, how can we reverse it, or do we need to reverse it? And I say the reason why a lot of other cultures aren't really that concerned about their history and their lineage is because they didn't have to go through the same thing that black people had to go through. And if you had to go through what black people went through, and still going through, then that is something that we should keep up front of our conversations with our children and each other. What do you think?
When I look at this move to eliminate the teaching of slavery, because there's never been black history in America's schools, you have some districts who have it, like in Philadelphia, you get a credit or so, but of course it's taught by white people, so it loses any benefit it would have had, because you got the oppressor teaching your children their history. How can there be psychological liberation when the person delivering the information is a colonizer themselves? But when I look at this move to eliminate the teaching of slavery and racism from American history classes and civics classes, I don't see it just as suppression of the information. I see it as a pretext and a prelude to the removal of African people from American society. I look at this as them preparing for the fact that they one day soon expect to have very little black people left in this country. Therefore, it's no need to even cover these topics. I mean, they're really setting up the society in such a way that it caters to black people no longer being around. So when they're getting rid of the DEI programming, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, once again, we don't plan on having black folks around too much longer, so we might as well get rid of everything that we created just to cater to them. And that's a big reason why I think black people need to stop calling ourselves people of color. We are not people of color. We are Africans. Stop calling yourself a minority. We are Africans. When you use words to describe yourself other than who you really are, you are supporting the narrative to eliminate you from the public conversation and from the society itself. Words like DEI. Why did it become DEI? It used to be affirmative action. It became DEI because we plan on taking care of all the immigrant groups, but we don't plan on taking care of black people. That's why they want us to use the word people of color, because guess what? If you get rid of all black people, you can still use the word people of color. If you get rid of all Africans in America, you can still use the word minority, because there would still be Chinese, there would still be Arabs, Latinos, East Indians, Jews, and poor whites, homosexuals, and women. You can still use the word minority. But if you use the word black, if you use the word African, everybody is absolutely clear as to who you're talking about. We have to stop being so ashamed to show up and show out based on who we are, not on who white people want us to identify with.
Wow, that's amazing. What do we do? Is there a way that we can, and what scares me is you say, one day soon. How soon are you talking about? Next week, next month, next year? That's 10 years before they put the pedal to the metal and trying to eliminate us?
I think we have been eliminating ourselves. We've been helping them to eliminate us. When you go on social media these days and listen to our fellow Africans or our fellow blacks, kind of engage and involve in certain ideologies that are Ethiopian ideologies, you'll be so surprised how they become so intoxicated with such ideologies, and they don't even think about what is really African traditional way of living. It is so amazing. So we've been helping these people to eliminate ourselves because we believe in everything they do than our own self.
Yeah, but I of the philosophy that I don't believe in blaming the victim, and we certainly have been victimized to think a certain way. We've been victimized to develop a certain mentality, and so we act out against each other due to the monster that they created in us, and then they want to talk about the monster that they created. It's like we become a Frankenstein, and they made us Frankenstein. And that's why we do a lot of harm to ourselves. And that's why I'm talking about what we need to do in order to reverse that and begin to love ourselves instead of being anti-black. Because you got a lot of blacks that are anti-black. And we need to eliminate that, and not each other.
Yeah. Well, you have more blacks who are anti-black than whites. The whites may be ruthless, but in terms of pure rejection, alienation, and contempt, as the most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said, he said the racism within the African race exceeds the racism directed at the African race. And I'm going to say this too, gentlemen, when we look at desegregation, because America never integrated. Most of our kids still go to 90% black schools. Most of our people still live in 80% segregated neighborhoods. So America never integrated, but you do have desegregation. When we look at the effects of desegregation, I believe one of the most harmful aspects of deseg was it exposed us to foreign ideology about healthy living and success. And in being exposed to this formal ideology about healthy living and success, we gave up our African culturalism for the Caucasians' capitalism. In other words, as African people, we always valued every human life equally, whether you was poor, whether you were homeless, whether you were mentally ill, whether you were a billionaire, life is always equal for African people because the God in the homeless man is no different than the God in the wealthy man. But the Caucasians have recreated our consciousness into a reflection of their own, where just like them, we judge people, their value. Your life, the value of a life is based on how much education you have and how much money you have. That's white people. And we as black people have swallowed it whole. Yeah. So we now look at other black people who don't have what we have as useless. You have black people who, just like Caucasians, believe that if you are poor, if you are homeless, if you are uneducated, if you dropped out of high school, that you are worthy of, that you are worthy of, that there's nothing wrong with getting rid of people who are struggling in this world. That is so far from who we are. Success for African people has always been about how much you've done for others. The most successful were the most impactful, the most charitable, the most influential. It wasn't the most selfish. It wasn't the wealthiest. It wasn't the biggest car or the biggest home. We have literally turned our backs on who we are to imitate the people who have caused us the greatest amount of harm. And that's why I always say that in order for us to have a truly authentic African world revolution, there must first be a psychological revolution. Garvey said it best when he said, if the black man and woman are not careful, we will drink in all the evil and poison of Western civilization, and we will from the effects of it.
That's true.
Eating the poison every day. It's like we have a funnel in the top of our head. They're just pouring that propaganda in, and some of us are just consuming it like it was nutritious. But listen, we got to take a break. Our producer said we got to take a break. We'll come back. We want to continue the conversation here in the studios of WURD with Dr. Umar Ifatunde Johnson, Patrick and Jadu, and myself, David Barnes, with our worthy in-studio board operator, Nicholas, keeping us in line. We'll be right back after this brief break.